My parents skipped my college graduation to attend my sister's gender reveal. I walked across that stage completely alone, diploma in hand. Nobody in the crowd who shared my name. 4 years later, I walked into the bank where they held my late father's hidden accounts as the new regional director. At 9 a.m., I took my seat at the head of the table. At 10:14 a.m., their names appeared on my first case file. By noon, every account they thought was buried was frozen. I want to be honest about something before I tell you all of it. I am not a bitter person by nature. I was not the kind of child who kept score or who cataloged every slight in some private ledger waiting for the day I could collect. I was, if anything, the opposite. I was the child who made excuses for both of them for years. My name is Renee Calloway. I am 34 years old. My father, Douglas Calloway, passed away 18 months ago after a cardiac event that was sudden and, according to the physicians, somewhat preventable if he had been honest with his doctors about his symptoms. He was 61. He was also, as I discovered after his death, a man with a second financial life that his wife, my mother Linda, had been quietly and skillfully maintaining for the last 8 years of his marriage. A financial life that should have been part of his estate. A financial life that should have been shared with his children. A financial life that included just over $900,000 in accounts held at Midland First Trust, a regional bank in Charlotte, North Carolina. The same bank where I became regional director of compliance and estate oversight 11 days after his funeral. I did not plan it that way. Some things simply land the way they land. Let me go back to the beginning because the graduation matters. It matters more than the money, actually. The money is what made the legal case, but the graduation is what made me understand, once and for all, who my family actually was. I was the first person in my family to earn a 4-year degree. My father had gone to community college for 2 semesters and then started working for his uncle's contracting company. My mother had finished high school and then married him at 21. My older sister Marcy had tried 1 semester at a state school and dropped out to work at a salon, which she eventually bought and now owns. None of that was shameful. None of that made them less, but it mattered that I was the first, and they knew it mattered, and they had told me it mattered to them. My mother called me the week before graduation. I was in my apartment in Durham, ironing my gown, which I had rented because I could not afford to buy it. I had worked 2 jobs for 4 years, waitressing on weekends and doing data entry for a small law firm during the week. I had 1 partial scholarship and 2 loans and a checking account that never saw more than $800 at once. I was not complaining. I was proud of it, the same way you are proud of anything you built yourself from scratch. She called, and her voice had that particular quality I had learned to read. Careful and pre-apologetic. The voice she used when she was about to deliver news she'd already decided to deliver, regardless of how I received it. Honey, she said, I need to tell you something about next Saturday. Marcy's gender reveal had been scheduled, she explained, for that same Saturday. A scheduling conflict, she called it. Marcy had booked the venue first, before we knew the graduation date, which was not exactly true, because my graduation date had been set and communicated since February, and the gender reveal had been planned in May. But I let that go. I let it go the way I had let many things go, because I was practiced at it. Your father and I are going to have to miss the ceremony, she said, but we'll celebrate with you when you're home for the 4th of July. We'll do a dinner, something nice. There was no dinner. The 4th of July came and went. Nobody mentioned it. I walked across the stage alone. I wore a dress I had bought secondhand. I had 1 friend in the crowd, my roommate Becca, who took a photo on her phone and sent it to me afterward with 3 exclamation points and a heart, because Becca understood that the photo was the only one I was going to have. The dean handed me my diploma and shook my hand, and I smiled for the official photographer and walked back to my seat and felt something close inside me, something that had been open for a very long time, close quietly and completely, like a window against weather. That was the day I stopped waiting for them to show up. After graduation, I moved to Charlotte for a position at a mid-size financial consulting firm. I had a degree in finance with a focus on regulatory compliance, which was not glamorous but was precise, and I had always been good at precision. I was good at finding things in documents that did not match, at understanding what the numbers said when the words tried to say something else. I spent 4 years at the firm, then 2 more at a regional credit union. Then I was recruited to Midland First Trust for the director role. The offer letter arrived on a Thursday. My father died on a Sunday. 6 days later, I drove to Greensboro for the funeral. I had not been home in 8 months. My mother and Marcy had handled everything, the arrangements, the obituary, the reception, which was held in my parents' house and catered by a local barbecue place my father had loved. I stood in the living room of the house I grew up in and shook the hands of people I barely remembered. And when I finally sat down with my mother at the kitchen table that night, she looked at me across our coffee cups and said, I know things have been distant between us. I did not say anything. I let her talk. She talked about stress and about the years and about how sometimes families grow apart without anyone meaning for it to happen. She talked about how proud they had always been of me, which I received without comment. Then she said something that shifted the entire temperature of the conversation. She said, your father left a will, and you and Marcy are both in it. The house, the contracting accounts, the personal savings. Patricia over at First State is handling it. She paused and turned her coffee cup in her hands. There wasn't much liquid, she said. You know how he was with money. He always kept it close. She said it easily, I thought. The way you say something you have rehearsed enough times that the rehearsal has worn away the self-consciousness. I nodded. I said I would call Patricia. I called Patricia 2 days later from my car in the parking lot of a grocery store because that was the only quiet place I could find. Patricia was a probate attorney, efficient and kind, who walked me through the estate documents in 20 minutes. The house, the personal checking account, $14,000, a small life insurance policy, my father's truck, which Marcy was taking. She and I were listed equally. I thanked her and was about to hang up when she said, is there anything else you'd like me to look into? Sometimes in estate situations there are accounts the family isn't immediately immediately aware of, if you have any reason to believe there were additional assets. I paused. Then I said, what would make you think that? Patricia paused back. She said, I received a call last week from someone at Midland First Trust, a routine estate notification query. Your father had accounts there, but when I called to follow up, I was told the accounts had already been administratively transferred. She said it carefully, the way someone says a careful thing when they're not sure how much you already know. I just wanted to make sure you were aware. I was not aware. I told her I was not aware, and then I told her where I was about to start working. I started at Midland First Trust on a Monday. I spent the first week in orientation, systems, access, compliance, framework review, introductions to the team. On Friday of that first week, I was given my initial caseload, a stack of flagged accounts requiring review under the bank's estate processing protocols. Accounts that had been flagged for irregular transfers during the estate notification window, a procedure that existed precisely because the bank had seen this before. Heirs being quietly cut out by surviving spouses or other family members who moved assets before the estate process could catch them. On the Monday of my second week at 10:14 a.m., I opened the fourth file in my stack. The account holder name at the top of the page was Douglas Allen Calloway. I sat very still for a moment. The office was open plan, and there was the usual low sound of phones and keyboards and the coffee machine running in the break room. I sat still, and I read the file the way I had been trained to read files, carefully, without editorializing, letting the numbers say what they said. 3 accounts, opened 8 years ago. A primary account holding $620,000, a secondary savings account holding $198,000, and a joint investment account holding $84,000. All 3 accounts had a named secondary holder, Linda Jean Calloway, and all 3 accounts had been flagged because within 9 days of Douglas Calloway's death, $847,000 had been wire transferred out in 3 separate transactions to a personal account in Linda Calloway's name only, at a different bank entirely. The remaining $55,000 had been transferred in 2 installments to an account registered to Marcy Ann Calloway Briggs. I closed the file. I opened it again. I read it a second time, and then a third, not because I had missed anything, but because there is a specific kind of stillness that comes over you when you are reading something that will change the shape of everything, and you need a moment inside it before you move. Then I picked up my desk phone and called our legal department. The accounts were frozen by 11:47 a.m., not by me personally. I had immediately disclosed the conflict of interest and handed the file to my deputy, a meticulous man named Gerald Park, who had been doing this for 22 years and who processed the freeze with the calm efficiency of someone who had seen this particular shape of grief before. But I was in the room. I heard my mother's name spoken aloud across the conference table as a subject of investigation. I felt the specific, quiet weight of that. I called Patricia that evening from my apartment. I told her what I'd found. She did not sound surprised. She said she would file a motion to reopen the estate immediately. She also said, and I want you to hear this correctly, Renee, what your mother did may constitute fraudulent transfer under North Carolina estate law. The fact that she was a joint holder on the accounts does not automatically grant her the right to move funds outside the estate process, especially not in that volume, and especially not that quickly. I asked her what happened next. She said, next, she gets a letter, and then she has to answer for it. My mother called me 14 days after the freeze. I knew she would call eventually, and I knew which version of her would call. Not the careful one from the kitchen table, but the other one, the one that emerged when she felt cornered. I had grown up with both versions. I knew the architecture of each. She started with injury. How could you do this to your own family? Then she moved to context. Your father wanted me to have access. We had always planned it this way. Then she moved to comparison. Marcy would never have done something like this, which was an interesting thing to say given that Marcy's name was also in the file. Then she moved to consequence. You are going to destroy this family. You are going to destroy your relationship with your nieces and nephew. You are going to regret this when I'm gone. I let her finish. I had learned a long time ago that trying to interrupt her in this mode was like trying to interrupt a weather system. You waited. When she stopped, I said, Mom, Dad had over $900,000 in accounts that were not disclosed to the estate. That money belonged to both of us. You moved it within 9 days of his funeral. She said, he would have wanted me to have it. I said, then he should have put that in the will. The silence that followed had a specific texture. Not the silence of someone who has no answer, but the silence of someone who has just realized that the answer they had always counted on, the appeal to loyalty, to family, to being the child who understood, wasn't going to work. Not this time. Not anymore. I want to tell you about an object because this story has one. Every story like this has one. When I was cleaning out my father's study 2 weeks after his death, sorting through the things my mother had asked me to box for donation, I found a photograph tucked into the back of his desk drawer. It was from my college graduation. Not from the ceremony. He wasn't there for the ceremony, but from a separate photograph, a portrait I had taken at the campus studio a week before the ceremony. As part of a package my school offered, cap and gown, professional lighting, the kind of thing parents ordered framed copies of. My father had ordered a print, an 8x10, no frame, just the print itself, kept in the back of his desk drawer under a rubber band. On the back, in his handwriting, he had written my name and the date and the words, my daughter, first in the family. He never told me he had it. He never mentioned he had ordered it. He did not come to the graduation, but he had kept that photograph in his desk for 4 years, in the dark, like something he was not sure what to do with. I stood in his study for a long time holding it. I still have it. I keep it in my own desk now, not in the dark. The legal process moved the way legal processes do, slowly and with a great deal of paper. Patricia filed to reopen the estate in October. The bank's own compliance investigation ran parallel, as it was required to do. Gerald Park handled everything on the bank side with his customary precision, and while he was careful never to discuss specifics with me me beyond what was appropriate. I understood from the general shape of things that the documentation was not ambiguous. 3 transfers, 9 days, no estate notification. Clear. My mother retained an attorney named Howard Cross, who sent several letters to Patricia's office that Patricia described. When I asked, as creative, the central argument appeared to be that the joint account structure had made Linda the legal owner of the funds at the moment of Douglas's death, and that therefore no fraud had occurred. It was, Patricia told me, not an unreasonable legal theory. It was also, she said, going to fail, because the accounts had been opened with explicit language designating them as household investment accounts, not survivorship accounts. Someone had structured them carefully, just not carefully enough. My sister Marcy called me once, in November. She was crying before I answered, which was also a technique I recognized, not necessarily conscious, but practiced. She said she had not known about the accounts. She said she had just accepted the money Mom sent her, and had assumed it was from Dad's regular savings. She said she felt sick about it. She said she had 2 kids and another on the way, and she was sorry. I believed parts of that. I told her the estate process would determine what happened with the funds. I told her Patricia would likely reach a resolution that was fair. I did not tell her that the thing I kept thinking about was not the money. I kept thinking about the graduation, about the barbecue place at the reception, about the coffee cups at the kitchen table, and my mother's practiced voice, and the photograph in the desk drawer that my father kept and never mentioned. He had kept it. That meant something. I was still working out what. The estate was formally reopened in January. Howard Cross filed 2 motions, both denied. By March, an agreement had been reached. $820,000 would be returned to the estate for proper distribution, with a small portion offset for legal fees, and the portion already spent by Marcy, which was deemed recoverable in part. The remaining balance was divided according to my father's will, which listed his children equally. My share came to just over $380,000. I sat with that number for a long time in my apartment, with a cup of tea that went cold the way tea does when you're thinking instead of drinking. I thought about the ironing board, and the graduation gown I had rented, and the second-hand dress, and Becca's 3 exclamation points, and the way the window had closed inside me as I walked back to my seat, and the photo in the desk drawer with my name on the back in my father's handwriting. I did not feel victorious. That is the honest answer. I felt the specific exhaustion of someone who has been right about something they wish they had been wrong about. My mother and I have not spoken since the settlement. She sent 1 letter, handwritten, 3 pages, which I read once and filed. It covered injury and context, and comparison and consequence in roughly equal measure, with a new section at the end about forgiveness that I thought was genuinely felt, even if it arrived on her schedule rather than mine. I have not written back. I do not know if I will. Some doors take time to figure out whether they are closed or just not yet open. My father's photograph sits on my desk at Midland First Trust now, in a simple frame I bought at a drugstore. The image is slightly soft. The campus studio was not top tier, but his name is on the back in his own handwriting, and that matters more than the lighting. Some mornings I look at it before I open the first file of the day, not for any particular reason, just because it's there, and because some things deserve to be seen in the light. I am the first person in my family to earn a 4-year degree. I walked across that stage alone. Nobody in the crowd shared my name, and when it was over, I drove home to my apartment, ate leftover pasta, and thought, I am going to build something. I did not know yet what shape it would take, or what would be inside it when I got there. I just knew I was going to build it regardless, alone, if I had to. That was the only plan I had, and as it turns out, it was enough.